So, Beis Daf, Be'ez Hashem is Masechta Kidushin Daf of Aleph, and we're starting halfway down the Amid. Boyim Dei Rav Huna Rav Chinana Rav Sheshes. So let us just, review what we're talking about over here. The Torah says an interesting thing, that if you become poor and sell your property, your family heirloom property in Israel, then there's a mitzvah of your relative to come. I put the chumash on the screen here. That your relative should come, and you sold it because you were desperate for the money, but your relative should come and try to purchase it back for you. If a person doesn't, if a person does not have a relative, we don't know what that means. Every person has a relative. What that could mean is that your relative doesn't want to shell out the money, or he doesn't or he doesn't want to, or he can't. And if you eventually, save up the money, of course you can redeem it. But when you redeem it, then you have to give him, you have to buy it back from the fair price. You can't just give him $5 and get your property back. You have to work out a fair price. But if you don't redeem it, then it stays by the purchaser till yovel. So we see the concept of a relative coming to redeem you, bail you out. You also see that concept also in another situation in the Torah. Torah says that if you become so poor and you sell yourself to a guy, right? Let's say you're poor and you sell yourself to a guy. The Torah says, Achrei nimkar, after you sold geulati aloi. One of your relatives should bail you out. Now the Torah lists an order of who's your favorite relative. Or your uncle bails you out. Or ben daidai, your cousin, bails you out, buys you back from the guy. Or the relative should bail you out. But if you don't bail yourself out from the guy, then you stay by the guy. He's your boss, so to speak. You're an eved by him till yovel. Now, there's one other point that the Torah does. There's a concept called having a house in a bate arei chayma. What does that mean? Jerusalem is a walled city, correct? If you own a house in that city, the Torah says if you sell it, you have 1 year to buy it back. You can imagine. I can't understand. My father lived in Williamsburg, on Ross Street. He had a big house. They sold it. If I had the chance to buy it back, it's worth a lot more. But anyway, so the Torah says if you have a house in this walled city, you have a year to buy it back. If not, then it belongs to the purchaser, and you can never buy it back. Now here, the Torah is quiet and saying, what about, let's say your relative comes up with the money. Can he force the purchaser to sell it back? That's the Gemara's question over here, okay? So that's the Gemara's question over here. Okay, here we go. Yeah, hello? Yeah, sorry. So the Gemara says like this. Boya minei Rav Huna. So we're on the Chaf Aleph, Amad Aleph, right in the middle of the page. Boya, I'm going to make it bigger. Boya minei Rav Huna Rav China Rav Sheshes. Rav Huna asked Rav Sheshes, guy sells a house in a walled city. Let's call this walled city Jerusalem. Now, nigel l'kroivim or a nigel l'kroivim. Since can your relative buy it back? Or can your relative not buy it back? Only the Torah gives you the opportunity to buy it back if you have money, but not your relative, because by a stei achuza, which is a property that you have, let's say a field, the Torah says your relative can get it back. Or if you're sold to a guy, right, an eved ivri sold to a guy, the relative could step in. But here the Torah is quiet by bate arechaima. Do you learn gulasai mistei achuza? Do we have a gezerah shava from gulasai? Mastei achuza, just like an inheritance property, a field. Torah tells you can't partial redeem it, and the Torah also tells you by a stei achuza, you can redeem it. Your relative could step in. This negelas lechatzoin means either you 100% come up with the money, or that's it. There's no partial payments here. So also over here, you don't can't partially redeem it, but your relative could step in. So this is the Gemara saying. We learned right here. It says machuzasai. The Torah says the word geulasai. Right here, I put it in blue. And over here, the Torah allows you a relative to redeem it. So maybe we'll have Gzeir Shava to Bate Arechaima, Gulasai to Gulasai, that just like Stei Achuza, your relative could redeem it, can buy it back. So also by Bate Arechaima, your relative could step in and buy it back. Now, or by Dilma, maybe back into the Gemara, Kiksiv Geula Bachatzayin Hudiksiv. The Torah just tells you that the word geula teaches you that there's no partial payments by stei achuza, and there's no partial payments by bata arechaima. It teaches you one teaching, but perhaps relative could bail out stei achuza, which it says that in the pasuk, but the relative cannot bail out a bata arechaima. B'kroivim loiksiv. Amalei, so Rav Sheshes answers definitively by a bias in Batei Arechaima. Again, the house in Jerusalem. If you sell it, it's only you who have the right to buy it back, but your relative can step in and buy it on your behalf. Ein a nigel, it's not redeemed by your relative. So Esvei, so the Gemara asked the question. Well, there's another pasuk that says, we're going to bring up that pasuk over here. The pasuk says, don't sell your land to ever. God, Yovel redeems all lands. Yovel, brings everybody back to the original property. And then the Torah says, Ubakol eretz achuzaskem, in the entire land of your inheritance, entire Israel, gulatit nu ba'aretz, you're allowed to redeem. So that's an extra pasuk. What does that teach you? So there's another brisa that says, l'rabbis batim ve'eved ivri. It teaches you by houses you could redeem, and by an eved ivri you could have redeemed. Now, what does it mean by a house you could redeem? It means that a house could be redeemed. Obviously, the Torah says you could redeem it, but that maybe is trying to say that by a batei arechaima, your relative could also redeem it. Maybe that's the pshat in the brisa. My love, doesn't this teach you batei arechaima, by a house in surrounded by a walled city, even your relative could redeem it? Answers the Gemara, loy. That's not teaching you that. It's teaching you batei chatzerim, a house in an unwalled city, your relative can redeem it. And there's a pasuk that says, what happens if you sell a house in an unwalled city? The Torah tells you that house in the unwalled city, here it is, I bring up the pasuk, batei chatzerim, astei haaretz yichashev. That's like selling a regular field. So now the Gemara says, what do you mean? I have an extra pasuk that teaches you that a batei chatzerim, your relative could redeem it. Batei chatzerim be'ediksibo. By batei chatzerim, by an unwalled city, a house in an unwalled city, the Torah tells you clearly, astei haaretz yichashev. It's like a regular field. And just like your regular field, your relative could redeem it, so also batei chatzerim, your relative could redeem it. So why do I need this extra pasuk to teach you by batei chatzerim, your relative could redeem it? I know it straight from the pasuk. Answers the Gemara, that extra pasuk teach you l'kayva chayva, to set it that it's an obligation for your relative to redeem. Our opinion goes according to Rabbi Lazar. Tanya, we learned to the brisa, the goel is mimkar of it. When you sell a field, right, your relative could step in and buy it back. So Rabbi Lazar says it's Rabbi Yeshua says it's a reshus. It's optional. You can't force the relative to start, buying back property. Maybe it's an obligation. The Torah says, what happens if your relative doesn't want to do it? What does the Torah mean? You don't have a relative? Ella, what it means, the shot in that pasuk is even if you have a relative, the Eina writes he doesn't want to buy it, that he has the option. So it's all optional for a relative to step in and buy your field back. Divi Rabbi Yeshua. But Rabbi Lezer says, no, the goel es minkar achiv, that a relative has the obligation to buy the family, property back to his relative. In other words, the uncle has to step in and buy it back and return it to his nephew. Chayv, it's an obligation. Maybe it's optional. Talmud loima, bekoel. Geula titnu hakosef kov oichai. The Kaira gives it as an obligation. So what the Gemara just came out over here is that the reason that the pshat in the original brisa that says bakoil is l'rabbeis batim doesn't mean that a bate oire chayma the relative has a right to buy it back. That doesn't exist. Not like Rav Sheshes. Like Rav Sheshes, ain't a nigel. But it teaches you by bate chetzerim, not only does the relative have the right to buy it back, but he also has the obligation to do so. The extra pasuk forces their relative to come up with the money and to buy it back. Amru le Rabbanan Ravashi. Rabbanan said to Ravashi. Amru le, and some say Ravina said to Ravashi. Now, the Gemara assumes that there's an opinion that disagrees with Rav Sheshes. Bishlam Lamande Omar, according to the opinion that disagrees with Rav Sheshes, LaRabbi Spote Oyer Chayma, that even a house that's in a walled city, that the relative has a right to redeem it. Hainu Deksiv, that's why the Torah says, Bechoil. Like over here, the Torah writes, Bechoil Eretz Achuzaskem, Gula Titnu Laretz, in the entire land, including Abate Arachayma, which we say that the relative could redeem the city, could redeem the house. It's coming to include a house that is an unwalled city, my Bechoil. What is the Bechoil teaching you? To teach you that that a house in a chatzer, but the chatzerim can be redeemed. The Torah says clearly that it could be redeemed by relative. It says it has a din like a. The Torah says but the chatzerim is like a sedei achuza. So what do you do with the extra word bekoil? Kasha. So what you see over here, by the way, that there is a machloikas tanoim, and that's what you have to remember. By bate arechayma, the Torah was silent and did not tell us whether a relative could redeem or not. It actually is a machlokes tanoim. Esvei Abaya, but our Rav Sheshes really clearly said that it's not. You can't redeem a batei rechayma. Relative is not allowed to redeem. We don't give a right to relative to do it. Esvei Abaya. Abaya said, "Ma Talmud loima." There's a pasuk that says, "Yigolenu, Yigolenu, Gimel, Yigolenu, Gimel Pa'amim." It says 3 times redeem. Where does it say 3 times redeem? Well, it's in the pasuk that discusses right over here. If a person if your goy became rich and you became poor and you were sold as an evet ivri to a goy, the Torah says your relative should step in, yigalenu. Here's one time it says yigalenu, or your uncle or cousin should yigalenu, or another relative should yigalenu. So the pasuk says 3 times the word yigalenu, right? I yellowed it out 3 times. It teaches you that any redemption that the Torah discusses allows relatives to step in. So the Torah says, my love. So the Baya says, this is what the Brisa says. What does this Brisa mean to say? Batei arachayma ve'eved ivri. Doesn't it teach you that a batei arachayma relative could step in to redeem, and an eved ivri that's sold to a Yisrael, that somebody else, a relative, could redeem him? And says the Gemara, loy, not so. Batei chatzerim u'sedei achuza. It's teaching you about batei chatzerim and sedei achuza, that they can be redeemed by relatives. Says the Gemara, batei chatzerim u'sedei achuza behediksiv astei aretz yichashev. The Torah told you by a regular field that a relative could redeem it. We saw it already in the beginning of the shir, that if you sell your property, your field in Israel, your relative could redeem it. What are you teaching me now that your relative should redeem it? And since the Gemara, Rav Nachman said, La karev koidim, that there is an order which relative we require to redeem. First comes your closest relative, which is your uncle, then the cousin, then other relatives, let's say a second cousin. The Rabbi Nachman Yitzchak said it in a different question, but we can apply it over here. That part is telling you that there's an order of redemption. And just like the order is said by Eved Ivri that is sold to a goy, the Torah says, Oy doi doi, Oy ben doi doi, first your uncle or cousin, Oy misher bar sari, or other relatives. So that's the order of who has the obligation to redeem. Now, what was Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak talking about? The following case. There was a question asked in the yeshiva. Eved Ivri hanimkal Yisrael. An Eved Ivri that sold to a Jew, right? A regular Jewish Eved sold to another Jew. Nigel Akroivim, my ain't nigel Akroivim. Can a rich relative say to the master, I'm buying my cousin out, or not. Though he has no right to do that. So Aliba the Rebbe like to buy. There was never a question according to Rebbe. The Amar Misha in a nigel be'ela nigel b'sheish Amar loy mifra. Rabbi said it in another context. He says that Eved Ivri is not nigel b'kroivim. Be'ela means he doesn't get this option with kroivim to redeem him out. Eved Ivri hanimka Yisrael. So according to Rebbe, for sure, a relative can step in by an Eved Ivri hanimka Yisrael to redeem you. When was the question? Aliba the Rabbanim. Rabbanan who are silent about it. Do we learn Yalfin and Socher Socher? There's a Gzer Shava of Socher Socher. What's the Gzer Shava of Socher Socher? The Torah tells you the word Socher by an Eved Ivri Hanimka Lagoy, and the Torah also uses the word Socher by an Eved Ivri that's sold to another Jew. Like here. So just like an Eved Ivri that's sold to a Goy, the relatives have a right to redeem, so also an Eved Ivri that's sold to another Jew, the relative have a right to redeem. So Yalfin and Sachasav loy dashini yigalenu, oydilma yigalenu lezev loy laacher. Or maybe the Torah gave a special limitation, only that a kroivim could redeem an Eved Ivri hanimka legoy, but not an Eved Ivri hanimka Yisrael. So the Gemara says, Tashma. The Gemara says there's a raya b'chol gula titnu l'rabbeis botim be'eved ivri. Here, there's a pasuk that says that an eved ivri gets the right, extra right of being redeemed by a relative. Ma'ila boter erechayma be'eved ivri animkal Yisrael. So we see an eved ivri that's nimkal Yisrael. This brisa seems to include an eved ivri that's sold to another Jew has a right to relatives to redeem them. And for the Gemara, not so. Eved ivri animkal legoy. That pasuk is being marba and Eved Ivri that's sold to a guy. Frag the Gemara, Eved Ivri animkal a guy, an Eved Ivri that's sold to a guy, a relative could redeem it. That's what another pasuk teaches you. It says that clearly out in the pasuk. When an Eved Ivri is sold to a guy, the Torah tells you, his uncle or cousin should redeem it. We go to Chaf Aleph Amabez. Who? No, that it's lekoivai chayva. That's to include it, that it's an obligation to redeem it. Even though Rabbi Yeshua never puts the obligation on relatives to come up with the money, but if an Eved Ivri is sold to a guy, we have an extra pasuk that the Torah wants you to redeem him right away. Why? Because he's at a guy's house, so he's going to learn bad things from the guy. So therefore, the Torah specifically made it a chayva that the relatives should redeem it. But we're not clear, and Eved Ivri Anim Kili Yisrael does he get the right to be redeemed by kroivim? Tashma, come in here, Matam Eloim Yigalenu Skimel Pa'amin. By an Eved Ivri Hanimka Lagoy, it says Yigalenu 3 times. The Ragvus Kolagulish Nicholas can say that. Anytime you redeem, relatives could step in. Maila, Bater Chaima, the Eved Ivri Kili Yisrael. This price wants to include that an Eved Ivri that's sold to Yisrael also gets redeemed by kroivim. And says the Gemara, but the Chetzeir Mastei Chazuzah. It teaches you, but the Chetzeir Mastei Chazuzah are redeemed by kroivim. But the Chetzerim, but the Chetzerim, the Torah tells you that it has a din like Stei Achuzah, and by Stei Achuzah, the Torah says relatives could redeem. So I don't need another pasuk Yigalenu, to teach you that Stei Achuzah could be redeemed by relatives. Amrav Nachman Yitzchak lekarav karav kodim, because to teach you the order of who should redeem. By Stei Achuzah, the Torah only tells you a relative can redeem, but it doesn't tell you who gets the first right to redeem, who's the first obligation to redeem. The Torah tells you in another place, by Eved Ivri Anim Kali to Lagoy, that you start with the uncle, then the cousin, and then then other relatives. So bottom line here is, and here we finish this sugya, and then we go into another quick sugya, that when kroivim redeem, and by Stei Achuzah, that we know. And every sold to a guy, also kroivim could redeem. Batei Chatzeirim, kroivim could redeem, because that has a din like a chuzah. But Batei Arechoima, we learned there's a machlokes Tanoim, and Eved Ivri Hanimka Yisrael could they be redeemed? That the Gemara did not answer. Now we go back to a new topic. A new topic is like this: V'hanirtza nikna beritzia. How do we buy an Eved who tells me, I have an Eved Ivri, he says he wants to stay. He likes his shiksa wife and his children, and he wants to stay. So all you got to do is drill his ear. How do you know that? You drill his ear with a drill. The koines atzmei b'yovel misasadin. And how does he get free? So the Mishnah said that when yovel, then he pops out, and or if the master dies, because he doesn't serve. If the master dies, that Eved Ivri does not work for the son or the daughter. After you drill an Eved, he's your slave. La'olam. He's only your slave. He doesn't work for your son or daughter. So if you die, the master dies, he's not transferred over to the children as an inheritance. La'olam. How long does he work? He works till Yovel. Doesn't mean he's your Eved forever. It's till Yovel. Now, like we've seen often, since it's an obscure topic, the having an Eved that you drill an ear and he stays forever, so the Gemara discusses a couple of halachas regarding an Eved Hanirza. Tanur Rabbanim, Martzeya, the Torah says you should drill him with a drill. Ein li'ela Martzeya, with a drill. Menayin the rabbis, how do I know? You don't have to use a metal drill. You could use hasul, which is like a wooden sharp point. V'hasira is a thorn. V'amachad a needle. V'amakdeach an auger. V'amachtev or a stylus, a pen. Talmud Loimer, the Torah says, "V'lokachta, you take anything. L'rabbis kol davar shnikach biyad. You can take any sharp thing in your hand and drill his ear." Deir Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. But Rebbe says no. Rebbe says it can't be a wooden, toothpick. Mat miratzeya miyuchet shel me'achas. The word martzeya is generally a drill bit, so it's made out of metal. Avkol shel machas. The only time you can use is something made of metal. Davar acha, another meaning of this word hamartzeya. Lahavi hamartzeya hagadol. You could use an awl. If you don't know what an awl is, it looks like this on the picture. That's called an awl. And not only that, you can use a big one. So we're going to discuss all this meaning in the moment. So Amar Rab Loza, Yudin Beribi. Rab Loza said, Yudin Beribi, Yudin the great Gadol Adar, Hayadirish, Kishahein Roitzin, Ein Roitzin Ela B'Melsa. When they only drilled the earlobe. The Chachamim Ayman Chamsam is not so. And this is the way we paskin. Ein Evet Kohen Nirtzab B'Deish Nasa Balmon. So Evan Ivri Kohen doesn't get drilled because he becomes blemished, and when he'll get free, he'll never be able to work back in the base of Migdash. So the Imtaim B'Milseim writes him, if you tell me that you drill him in the earlobe, hey Evan Ivri Kohen Yasa Balmun, how do we allow this Evan Ivri Kohen to become a Balmun? Why do we allow the master to drill him in such a way that when he will eventually go free, he'll never be able to work in the base of Migdash? So the Chachamim don't like this idea that he's drilled on the earlobe. So where then should you drill him? You only drilled on the top of the ear. Okay, another 2 more minutes and then we'll stop. But my komipalgi. So what is the argument between Rabbi Lazar, Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi regarding can you drill with a drill bit that's made out of wood? So the Rebbe Darshi Klali Prati. Rebbe always uses the Klal Prat as the way to darshan the Chumash, which means it's a general. Prat. Prat means the Torah gives you an example. V'lakachta, the Torah says, take something, klal. It's a general rule. You can take anything. Martzeya, a drill bit, prat, is an example. Ba'ozne v'deles, and drill his ear into the door, chazav kol, it's another generalization. Klal, prat, uklal. Iyat adona ke'ena prat. It has to be something similar to the detail, to the example. Ma prat mafurish shel matachas, just like the example that the Torah gives is an example of a drill bit which is made out of metal. Afkol shel matachas, you have to use anything that's made out of metal. You could use, let's say, a pin, and you can use like a metal pen, but you can't use a wooden thorn. Rabbi Yossi has another way of darshan. The Torah amplifies and then restricts a little bit. The lakachta, the word lakachta means you amplify it. You include everything. Umiyat, martzeya is a miyat. When the Torah says drill bit, that means it's a limitation, restriction. Then the Torah repeats and amplifies it. Riba umiyat v'riba. The Torah gave you an amplification, restriction, and an amplification. Riba hakol, you include anything. According to Rabbi Yossi, you can use anything, even like I said, I think a toothpick or something. My ribi kol mili. So then my miyat, what is the restriction? Miyat sam. You can't put a poison that will automatically put a hole in the ear, because that's not using the strength of a human being to drill the hole. But anything else, you could use any tool. One more, amamar. Hamatseya, you could use the big awl. Lahavi amatseya gadol, big awl. My mashma, how do you know you can use a big one? Rava, whenever it says hey, like hayerech hamiyumena shabiyerech, the big thigh. Hachanami, the Torah wrote hamatzeh with a hey. You can use the biggest drill bit, the biggest awl that you have. Again, an awl looks like this, so you can use a big one like that. Amara, even though it's not meant for ears, but if it does the job, you can use it. One more. Amar Ablaza Yudin Beribi Hayadarish Kishain Reitzin Ein Reitzim El B'Milsa. Rabbi Yudin said, when they drill his ear, they can only drill it with the earlobe. The Chachamim Oimim Ein Eved Ivri Koyin Nirtza. You can't. If that was the case, if you drill the earlobe, then you wouldn't be able to drill. If you have an Eved Ivri who happens to be a Koyim, he wouldn't get drilled because you're making him a blemished person. So what's the problem? V'yasa balmum, like him a blemished person. If you have an Eved Ivri who's a Kohen, he's required to be nirtza. So then make him a balmum, drill him in the earlobe. What's the Chachamim's problem? Why the Chachamim changing it that he's only drilled by the cartilage of the ear? And here we'll end. Amar Rabba Barav Shila, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'shav el mishpachtoi. When an Eved leaves, gets freed by Yovel, he has to return to his family. He has to return to the stature that he was, to the way he was prior to him sold as an Eved. Well, prior this being sold in an Eved, he had a right to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. If you're going to blemish him in the ear, then he won't be able to, when he gets freed, to go back to serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, we don't drill in a way that makes him a blemished kohen by drilling in the earlobe, but rather Chachamim hold you drill by the cartilage of the ear on the top of the ear. Okay, we'll stop right over here by Yibaylahu, and we'll continue with this interesting Gemara tomorrow.
Interesting. Sure, Baruch. Thank you.